Thank you very much, and it's great to be here in warm LA. I was asked to speak, and I will speak for the next 30 minutes, and then open it up for questions. And I'm going to speak in three parts. The first is a little bit about how to frame all the changes that are happening and what the changes are. Building on Adam, and everything that Adam mentioned is absolutely aligned with our thinking. But since he's mentioned those, I'm going to approach it slightly differently, so not to be duplicative. Second is about the power of individuals in this particular world. And the third is the implications on you as individuals. Sometimes we forget that there are two types of individuals. There is the people that we are trying to build brands with, and then there are the people who are trying to build those brands. And one of the things that we're very interested in is making sure that we don't forget us in this whole model. So I'm going to start with a few big thoughts. So I'm going to start off with 10,000 feet, then land at 100, and then finally get to 1 feet or 1 foot. So one perspective really is how do we keep abreast of all the change that's happening? Since there is so much change that tends to happen. And any given day, if we aren't watching, we get surprised. And so there is a level of deep insecurity among all of us that there is this essential piece of knowledge that without which every decision we make is going to be bad. And so what we do is we keep reading a lot and trying to discover as many things as possible. What I'm supposed to do in my job is help guide a few companies which are relatively not small. And often I'm asked, okay, what should we do? Now, they'll normally do the exact opposite, but they will ask, what should we do? And if I were to actually try to keep up with all the news, I would basically say, I'll get back to you after I figure it out, because there's something more to read. Because by the time you finish reading everything that there is to read, there's something more in your inbox. So instead, I've tended to simplify it to a few key points. And all that I do is I interrogate those key points to try to understand when they are no longer relevant. So the first piece of advice really is decide what the world looks like and get on with it. Okay? So what does the world look like? Or at least, what are we betting that the world looks like? The first is we're living in what we call a connection engine age. And what do we mean by the connection engine? The single biggest change that ever took place between, I would say, the start of life and maybe 15, 20 years ago, was actually not the invention of fire, not the invention of the wheel, and not the invention of the quote-unquote printing press. Okay? It was none of those. It actually was the invention of the internal combustion engine. And the internal combustion engine, which is really what changed world history. It allows electricity. It allows me to fly on a plane from Chicago to here when I was actually in Asia the day before. It allows everything that we see with regard to the internet, but it also changed society. It gave birth to the automobile, therefore it gave birth to the suburbs. Countries that embraced it, which was primarily Western, grew. Countries that did not embrace it, which were China and India, which were the dominant cultures then, fell. Interestingly, there's something bigger than the internal combustion engine now, and we call it the external connection engine, or the connection engine. And that really is broadly the internet. And why do we insist on calling it the connection engine and not calling it the internet? Because when you call it the internet, you will find many senior people, both within your organization and at marketers outside of your organization being a technology-driven company, will basically believe that it's something that the IT department needs to do. Or it's not for them. Or it's for geeks. Or they cannot possibly get it. So instead we say, look, this is a connection engine where people are connecting to transact. They're connecting to discover. They're connecting to share. And they're connecting to express themselves. And anybody in any company cannot then say, well, I don't care. So it automatically becomes something that you, your management, your client has to care about, because this is no longer about a technology. So that's one key point. The second is we're living in an age of digital leakage. So we're living in this connection engine age, but it's a digital leakage. So let me show you where that works. So many years ago, the ultimate discovery engine was Yahoo, who's our sponsor. And then over time, the ultimate discovery engine turned out to be Google, who's also, here. And then there was the ultimate transaction engine is Amazon. The ultimate expression engine possibly could be, Twitter. The ultimate sharing engine, probably Facebook. Now, they won't say it, but if you go north, sooner or later, when you go from Mountain View to Palo Alto, you will have to pass a border. At the border, they will frisk you. They will ask you to do things that makes even the TSA look benign. And that is because the supposed great discovery engine and the great sharing engine hate each other. They don't say words like that, but that's human. Behind all the technology, it's Facebook versus Google. Now, simultaneously, in Cupertino, there's Apple, who can't stand the fact that there's a thing called Android. And then, laughing like a hyena, in Seattle sits Jeff Bezos. I thought you were supposed to be in the transaction business. What's this thing with taking over content and Kindle Fire and all of these things? When something turns digital, it's like hydrochloric acid. It burns across boundaries. So that's the second thought to keep in mind, which is there is increasingly going to be very hard to define the difference between content and contact, between media and creative, between what you are supposed to do and what somebody else is supposed to do, because that's the way the digital world works. I'll then later on explain how we should work in such a world, but I'm going to give you the concepts first. The third concept will make you think that I have had much to drink this morning, and I have, but as far as I can tell, it's black coffee and water. I didn't even touch orange juice in case I would get a sugar high. So what is that? What is this third concept? The third concept goes something like this. All things analog that can be are becoming digital. All things digital that can be are becoming mobile. And this is where the alcohol possibly comes in. All things mobile are becoming analog. What's that? You heard from Adam. You know yourself. When you have a phone, you no longer have to be at a place. You can be at the place you want. And there are two things you do. You go to places, you check in at places, you look up information at places, and you are with people. Places and people outside of gaming and Second Life are analog. Therefore, when somebody tells me they're digital at the core, I said, digital is so long ago. So long ago. I was talking digital in 1991. It's too late to talk digital because of what I just explained. So that's sort of the third concept. The fourth concept is about what's happening to the way we find quote-unquote audiences. Increasingly, in the digital world, there is nothing like mass media. There is no mass media in the digital world because mass media means you've got millions of people watching something at one time or reading something at one time. That does not actually exist in the digital world. People come to media one at a time. They go to the Yahoo homepage, they go wherever. They go to Facebook one at a time. It's not like television, where people have a 90% likelihood if they aren't going to the bathroom to see what's going on an ad in Desperate Housewives or whatever. They have a very good likelihood in the course of a week that 80 to 90% of the people who read a weekly have a chance to see the ad. No, this is one at a time. So if you wanted to reach everybody who arrives at the Yahoo homepage with one of their takeovers, in effect, it actually costs more than a Super Bowl commercial because you're paying a lot for frequency in order to get all the reach that you want in a particular day. And so the key thing is traditional marketing, which still is going to be very big, is about segmentation, taking large audiences and making them into small audiences. So it's like starting with a cow and getting to a steak. In digital marketing, it's about reaggregation. It's taking audiences of one and making them large enough to market to. So it's like starting with a piece of mince and getting a hamburger. Search, for instance, is a great reaggregation engine because it allows you to buy 30,000 people who are searching for Toyota, for instance. And the future of marketing is about segmentation and reaggregation, but they have very different rules. And we have to figure out how to apply both. So it's not an or world, it's an and world. It's segmentation and reaggregation. So that's the fourth concept. The fifth concept is really, really weird for most marketers. And what's really weird for most marketers is most marketers focus on the heavy user. For good reason. Pretty much in any category, the heavy user accounts for approximately 2/3 of usage. So that usually the top 20% to the top third accounts for 2/3 of usage, and they tend to account for about 75% of profits. So it's the right thing to do. But now we come to this entire world that Adam described of social media. And in this world of the social media, you have these things called influencers. And most marketers believe a heavy user is the same as a heavy influencer. I don't think they believe it, but they behave like they believe it. Now here comes the issue. A heavy user is someone who uses a product or service a lot. A heavy influencer is someone who basically has a large network or has charisma. Those definitions are different. And so there is an overlap between a heavy user and a heavy influencer, but they're different. But interestingly, within an influencer, you have two types of influencers. You have an advocate and you have a detractor. Advocates love you, detractors hate you. Guess who's more likely to speak? A detractor speaks 4 times more than an advocate. A detractor is highly unlikely to be a heavy user, unless they're a masochist. It's highly unlikely. So now all of a sudden, in a world of social, you have to talk to heavy users and heavy detractors. Tell me which of your clients' marketing campaigns are actually developed that way. Before the fact, not after the fact. After the fact is, somebody says something's wrong, now let's go have a PR campaign against them. Before the fact. The other is we don't actually, so that's sort of that concept. The sixth concept is we don't call social media for two reasons. One is media is very limiting, and second is most of it is unsocial. We instead call it the people's network. And the key question that we ask marketers is, how are you going to engage the people's network? And people say, word of mouth always used to exist. Yes, it did, but now people can scale it. So what happens is, in the old days, you couldn't scale it, but now we can scale it because we have connections, and we have people in our circles, and we have followers, and we have friends, and so it can scale. And so all of a sudden, you have to start thinking about the individual to a great extent. So those are my big trends, which then leads to sort of a segue into the individual. So the individual is intensely, intensely powerful. And I believe the key trend to keep in mind here is that we are marketing to the gods. That we are no longer marketing to consumers. We are marketing to people, but I think we're marketing to the gods, which is all of us when we are at home or wherever we are, have godlike power. And I'm going to give you two simple examples of godlike power. People basically want to conquer two things more than anything else. They want to conquer the ability to conquer time and distance. And they love people who can let them conquer time and distance. Because we want to live forever and we want to be at all places at the same time. That's a human need. Think about what you can do today with any smartphone, whether it be an Android, RIM, Microsoft, Apple. And describe what you do to someone 7, 8 years ago. You'd say, I have in my palm of my hand something that allows me to do the following. It allows me to listen to more music than exists in most music stores. It allows me to access this thing called the World Wide Web. It guides me where I need to go. With the new, Apple iPhone 4S, I have a personal assistant. I can search for anything that I want. I have an alarm clock in it. You have godlike power. Think about what you can do with the Google search engine. And by the way, that now happens to be on this little phone. Plus, you can take photographs. And then when things get really hard, you can play Angry Birds. And that's also a form of digital leakage, right? So when Apple came up, these are the businesses they completely reinvented. Yes, they did a number on Nokia, but they also did a number on Nintendo because people started playing games on this little deal. And they're about to do a complete number on Nikon. Why the hell do you want a camera with the new 4S 8 megabyte camera? The best camera is the camera you have with you, not the camera that you have to run around with. So all of a sudden, the supposedly Apple computer, which is what they used to be called, is undoing a whole bunch of businesses. Why? Because they're giving people godlike power, just like Google is giving people godlike power, just like many of the companies are giving people godlike power. And that's very important. We're marketing to the gods. Now, you don't normally see this in most vision statements that our clients have, or in most mission statements that our agencies have, or in most selling statements that the media industry has. We use words like, we will empower our consumer. I have news for people. They're already empowered. Just get used to the fact that you have to align with their empowerment. You're not giving them any empowerment. They already are empowered. So that's total BS, right? So when I see all these vision statements, my first thing to senior management is just tear it up. It's no longer relevant. So that's a very important thing to sort of keep in mind, okay? But the other thing to keep in mind is, who the hell are we talking about? You know, when we talk about target audiences and you understand how the target audience behaves, most of those descriptions make no sense. I simply turn around to the room and say, do you behave like that? They said, no, we don't behave like that. So I said, why do you, when you enter the office, leave half your brains downstairs and come upstairs and behave like an idiot? And the truth of the matter is, our clients, ourselves, our media partners, all of us basically behave like idiots. And we should stop it, because it's not necessarily going to be particularly conducive to where the world is going to go, because we are talking to highly, highly empowered people. And that is the thing to keep in mind. So what are some of the things we know about people, since it's about people, right? The first thing that we know about people is, while the world is going digital, people are analog, which basically means emotions matter. This is not only about data. I get so fed up when people keep talking about big data and about how they're going to have relationships with brands. You know, my whole basic belief is, I barely have time to have relationships with my friends. Why the hell do I want to have a relationship with someone who wants to pick my pocket? With the exception of, 3 or 4 iconic things, nobody wants to have a relationship. They want to basically, I don't have a relationship with Tylenol. I want my headache to go away. So this whole idea of relationship marketing, my stuff is like, oh my God, can you imagine if your boyfriend or girlfriend came to you and I'm going to be doing relationship marketing with you? That's how ridiculous it is. So just think of the words you use and say, does that make sense to anybody in this particular world? And the reason why it's very important is, in this world of people's network, one rule is you have to be authentic, which is you have to do what you say. This is no longer about let's align and market and angle. It doesn't work that well. Because somebody basically says that's total BS, and then that spreads, and then you are sitting there looking quite, silly. So that's a very important thing in this people's thing to think about. So in effect, it basically means, there was a philosopher called Blaise Pascal who basically said, people choose with their hearts and they use numbers to justify what they just did. And that often happens. So I'm not saying data is not important. It's very important. But don't let data be the stuff that makes the decision, because if your business and what you are doing is you are just making decisions on data, be very, very careful. My little friends in India will take away your job. They will. I keep far away from those people, okay? For 2 simple reasons. They know how to deal with this data thing, and if it's all about machines, the machine does it better. So unless you have a little bit of emotion and you have a little bit of analog in what you do, you may not have a long-term career. So whenever there is a machine, my stuff is to align with the machine, but never go straight up with the machine. You go up straight up with the machine, you lose. And so the reality of it is, in that particular thing, silicon will eat carbon. So you want to make sure, because you're carbon, then there's silicon. So how do you marry silicon and carbon becomes very important from an individual perspective. So that's, well, with the people that we're marketing to, keep those in mind, that you have to be authentic, they have godlike power, and they think with emotion and not just with data, which is very important. So now I'm going to sort of end before I open it up to questions, and I'm doing well on time, that's good. So what the hell does that mean for you? You and your company, regardless of whether you are a media seller, media buyer, client, creative agency, or just an entrepreneur, somebody who just by mistake came into this room. What does it mean? So there are a few things that I've learned over the years. And the first one is about change. So everybody tells you that change is good, right? So let me tell you something. Change sucks. And the reason is because I'm perfectly happy the way things are. If you have a miserable life, you go change. Because when you change, two things happen. You don't know what the hell you're doing and you make mistakes. You go up learning curves, you fall. And if you're a successful person, why the hell do you want to do that? Why do you want on public display for people to recognize you don't really know what you're doing? So when people say, change is good, my stuff is change sucks, but then I say something else which is not my line, which is the more things you want things to stay the same, the more you will have to change. Because otherwise you are going to be irrelevant, which is even worse than not changing. So you have to change because it's the only way to remain relevant, not because it's a great, good, beautiful thing to do, because it's actually very difficult. Anytime you'll have gone through changes, moved to a new city, new job, new girlfriend, given birth to a child, it's exciting, but it's not exactly fun and games when you sort of think about it. Here's how much I hate change. Okay, I worked for the same boss, our global CEO, for 11 years. My deal basically is you can basically call me whatever you want, as long as you pay me well. You can give me whatever job you want, but I'm working for this cat. Okay? You change this thing, something is off. Because I don't want to get used to somebody new. I've worked for the same company for 30 years. I've lived in the same neighborhood in Chicago for 32. And it was not an arranged marriage, but I met my wife when we were 12. I hate change. I'm the person responsible for change for the largest digital and media planning and buying companies in the world. How's that? Isn't that good? That's perfect. They gave somebody who hated the stuff the job. So if you find this very difficult and awesomely awful, welcome to the party. So here are some of the things that I would do to be somewhat successful given this awesomely awful thing. So the first one to think about is the industry that you are in is the most amazing industry of all time, which is marketing. I'm broadly defining it as marketing. And the reason is because of the very point that I made in the previous section, which is people are extremely empowered. About 3 weeks ago, I had the chance to meet Philip Kotler. Philip Kotler is a major marketer. He wrote the book on marketing at Northwestern. And it was the first book that I studied at that other university in Chicago, the University of Chicago, which had to import the marketing books from Northwestern. And in that book, he has a line which says, marketing is understanding and meeting customer requirements. And for the last 30 years, for about the first 25, I worked for some of the best companies in America while working for this company. And what I discovered is marketers were not actually doing that at all. They were actually paying attention to, in the 80s, it was about logistics. How do we get our stuff into Walmart? The 90s was about technology. And the zeros were about financial reengineering, consolidation, procurement. That's where most of the returns were coming from. But guess what happened? All of us got empowered. We now have godlike power. You have to actually understand and meet our requirements. This is marketing's time. It's not finance's time. Finance has to justify exactly why they need to be so big and what value they add. Accounting and law are going to be overtaken by my little friends in India. I mean, literally, radiologists, you name it. Okay? Marketing is really hard to do because it's about culture. It's about understanding people, it's understanding nuances, it's about imagination. This is one of the most interesting and growth industries. It's one of the reasons why, by the way, the largest technology companies in the world are all focusing on marketing, because marketing is twice the size of all the hardware and software industry in the world. So when people say you're in a bad business, you say, says who? How come everybody wants to be in this business? We just saw Adobe, right? Less interesting than the fact that they don't do Flash on mobile is that they've basically decided to go into digital marketing in a big way. That's what they announced. Not just with Omniture, but with a whole bunch of other things that they're doing. So you've got Adobe and Microsoft and Google and Yahoo and Apple. Hey, we're in a good place. And that's very important to recognize, that you are working in a growth industry. That's the first thing to keep in mind, which is very important. The second thing that is particularly interesting about this, which is what I would spend a lot of time focusing on, is this is an industry where you do not get far by being a scholar. You have to be an apprentice. And what do I mean by that? When I go to our senior clients, I basically tell them, I give them assignments. Okay, it works very differently. So I go in, and my stuff is like, okay, guys, all of you are doofuses. Open your books. Here's what we're going to do. Okay? I actually say something close to this, believe me or not. Okay? And I still have a job, which is somewhat good. And I say, look, unless you do this, it's no use reading about it or getting anybody. You have to do these things. So you better utilize all these things. If you don't utilize, if it's about social media, go utilize all the social media. If you don't do it, then you don't understand it at all. You can read about it, you can attend all the conferences, you can listen to me, you can read Mashable, won't do much. Okay, it'll teach you this much. When you do it, you actually realize what this is, so you can talk about it to people. But as importantly, you realize what's easy and what's difficult. So from a person's perspective, it's very important. Finally, and most importantly, in this whole people's network, one of the biggest things that I strongly encourage people to do is we're living in a world of personal brands. I work really hard that now nobody works for me, which is somewhat fortunate, I guess. But in the days when I'm a staff job, so I don't have anybody working for me. But in the old days, when I did, and when I used to start and run companies, the big thing that I would tell my folks is, I don't want you to come and tell me, you can get a better job outside. What I want to know is, find out how good that job is, and then 1 year from now, go back and see if you get paid more. Or there's another job that pays you even more. If that's true, you're working at the right company. If that's not true, quit. You're working at the good place if your external value keeps increasing. That's the magic. And the way you make your external value keep increasing is to make sure that you become a brand. And in the world of social media or the people's network, you should be a brand, because we are now living in a world of individual brands. And there are two things that are very important in individual brands. Three things. The first is you've got to understand what your niche is. You can't be good at everything. Make sure you decide what you're really, really good at. Because the world is too fast moving and too confusing and too challenging for you to basically do a whole bunch of stuff. If I had to do what I had to do and run a company, it wouldn't work. My colleagues who are amazing at running the Digitasses and Razorfish and Starcoms and all these others of the world don't have the time that I do to think about these things. But if they did, then those companies would fail. If I ran those companies would fail. Okay? So you have to decide what you're good at. And this whole idea of I want to be all things to all people makes no sense. So decide what you're good at, which is what's your niche. The second thing that's very important is why should people believe you? So what's your story? We're living increasingly in a world that you can't just be a BS artist like myself. Okay? You actually have had to have done something for real. Now, long time ago, in a place far away, I actually used to do real things. Okay? So I can always go back and say, in those old days. Okay? But you have to do something for real, because if you haven't done anything for real, people will say, what are you? You've never done anything for real. You're just running around. Okay? In fact, most social media experts are not very good at anything but building their own brand. Right? You've got to be good at building something besides your own brand. So you need to be known for something you do. You're not supposed to be known for yourself, which is very important. And finally, you need to have a voice. By voice is who are you? Because in an interesting world, it's very, very important for you to sort of think about that. So keep that in mind. And the last thing I will tell you is this. We're living in a world where the only way you can remain relevant is to reinvent yourself every single day. You may not know it. Many of your cells die, much of your skin peels. All kinds of things happen every day physically to you. You should also make sure that happens mentally, that you reinvent yourself every day. I'll open it up to questions now. Thanks.
So, do you think that the ad industry is staying relevant?
I believe that the ad industry is being forced now to stay relevant. And it's being forced to stay relevant for two reasons. The first reason, to a great extent, is clients are basically calling us on two things. Do we know what we're talking about, and why aren't we collaborating better? Because in a connected network world, where no one person can do it all, we also don't believe any one company can do it all. And so to a great extent, our clients are asking us, why aren't we collaborating? Second is, clients are basically asking us, do we truly, truly deliver insights, ideas, and imagination, or are we just living in yesterday's world? And so to a great extent, we are being reinvented ourselves because our clients are demanding it. There were some questions from Twitter, so I'll quickly do this. When it comes to messaging users as individuals, how do you create a strategy that balances scale and personalization? I think it's the basic idea is you have to know who you are, which is what the personalization is, which is who are you, or who are you speaking to? And the rest of it, scale, you control less and less. In today's world, the way you get scale is by delivering gifts and value, which is unless you are delivering gifts and value in a people's network age, nobody will scale. And often for a brand, the best way of doing it is improving your product and service and not necessarily advertising. You don't necessarily want people to talk about your advertising. You want people to talk about your product or service. So you need to know who you are, deliver value, and that's how you'll get scale. Okay, this basically says people love working on television, but when it comes online, it becomes small. What should they do about it? Here's the key thing. Television is going to be very, very powerful, and television will continue to grow. Actually, television usage is at a record high. Television prices are at a record high, and television is not dying or going away under any circumstance. Okay? So keep doing television, that's great. In fact, television, because of a lot of what Adam mentioned, is going to become more targetable, personalized, all of that. But when you move into a smaller world, whether it's a world of YouTube or Vimeo or everything else, recognize there are 3 or 4 benefits that come online which you don't necessarily get from television. The first is a certain degree of targetability, but as importantly, a great extent of 2 other things. the ability to interact, so you can have a transaction. So, the future of magazines and an iPad are really, it's e-commerce. Because in effect, it'll basically be selling the stuff that they are, raising lust for, as well as charging people for the content. It won't necessarily be advertising, but that's allowed to be, with regard to interactive. But the other is, it allows things to be social and passed along, to the point that Adam made. I think I spoke to this answer, so I've already answered this question. Okay, I'm going to end with one more thing, right? It's not the great one more thing of Steve Jobs, unfortunately, which is, how do you continue this conversation, and how do you continue to sort of learn? Could we have the next slide? I don't know if it's there. Okay. So here is, if you look at Connect right at the bottom, that's my Twitter handle. And one of the things I do to reinvent myself is I get up at 4:30 every morning when I'm in the United States, and I did that today, believe it or not. It was a little easier, you have to go 6:30 Chicago time. And I study for a couple of hours. And some of the things that I study, I actually tweet out. So I can save you money and time, okay? And this way I get followers, and therefore I have more people's network, and I can threaten my boss, okay? So that works that way, which is one. My name on Google+, LinkedIn, and Facebook is the second. So that's Connect. Moving to content. See, I actually do all of these things, right? Because I'm an old fogey. So I have to do these things. So I have a blog, a left brain blog, called Reinventing, and that's rishadt.wordpress.com. Okay. I have a right brain blog because I began to worry that our organizations were getting too much about data and technology. So I talk about art and how art and emotion should drive marketing. And that's rishadt.posterius.com. That allowed me to use WordPress. It made me learn Posterius. And then a lot of people basically ask, hey, you just spoke. Can we have your script? Can we have your thing? There is no script. If you notice, there is no script. Okay? There never has been a script. There's one thing that Kevin Roberts taught me, who's the head of Saatchi & Saatchi, 6-7 years ago. He said, don't you ever use a script. He says, you're the only person besides Kevin Roberts who can get away with that. So I said, okay, Kevin, we'll do that. So I don't use that. However, a lot of people tape me. So I've actually taken some of the more recent stuff and put it on rewinding, okay, which is my recent talks, including about where social is going, which I did for Brian Morrissey at his Digiday. So you'll find that at that place. Now, the reason for this, if you notice, is I actually eat my own dog food, right? What did I tell you? You have to be an apprentice. You cannot be a scholar. I do it. And because I do it, people say maybe he actually knows what he's talking about, which is one important thing. But the second is, it's very important to build a personal brand. This is personal brand building, so when I finally get found out and I'm unemployed, I at least will turn to this. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rishad. I'm totally motivated right now to go out and do something different, to reinvent myself. I encourage you all to remember that you have godlike, inordinate power. I want to thank our sponsors, our speakers, and all of you for coming today, and I hope to see you at an upcoming thinkLA event. Thanks.